Hello and welcome to an Envato Tuts Plus short course. I'm Adi, and in this course you'll learn the basics of creating and working with design systems. Now, these have become a very popular topic lately, and for good reason. A design system can help your team or your organization build products faster by using a set of predefined components and principles. Several major companies have started using design systems, and one of the most popular ones, and one that you've probably already used, is Google's Material Design. Adobe also has a design system that's called Spectrum. IBM has one, so does Shopify. We'll talk more about these in the next lessons, but for now, let's take a look at how we'll structure this course. We'll start the first chapter with a lesson where we'll define a design system and look at a few examples. In the second lesson, we'll discuss the structure of a design system. And in the third one, we'll look at some common types of systems. The second chapter of the course starts with a lesson about design tokens and principles. These are the core components of any design system. In lesson 5, we'll discuss the most accessible starting points for any system, which are color, spacing, and typography. And in the final lesson, we'll quickly go over the next steps. How do you grow your system past the 3 starting points we covered previously? We have a lot to cover, so let's get to it. First, what is a design system? We'll cover that in the next lesson. See you there. Welcome to the first lesson of this course. Let's talk about what a design system is all about. And at first glance, you might say that, oh, it's about design, right? Well, not true. A design system is a tool. We can think of it as a collection of reusable components that are guided by a set of standards. You can then use this collection to build any number of applications. Now, because this collection is guided by standards, right, designers and developers will have a much easier time building new products. First, designers don't have to guess every time when they need to design a new component or a new page. They can just reference that system. Developers don't have to build components from scratch every single time. So essentially, you're not reinventing the wheel with every new product. And this is fantastic because, 1, you save a bunch of time, and 2, your team gets to collaborate even more, right? So designers, developers, other people involved in that project get to reference this centralized map of components, of ideas, of guidelines. And not only that, they also collaborate to maintain it and to update it. Not to mention, by using a design system, you get consistency, and that's something that brands require dearly. When you're working off of a design system and you maintain the standards, you make sure that any new products you're developing are in line with the brand's identity. To give you an example, imagine that you or your team built a website like 2 years ago, and now you have to add some extra pages to that website. Well, if you created a design system for that project and you documented everything, well, creating these pages is really a piece of cake for both designers and developers. You simply follow the guidelines and you create the new pages. But if you didn't have a design system in place, you would have to reference this 2-year-old website and try and figure things out all over again. That's time-consuming, it's prone to errors, and it's inconsistent, really. So not a very good idea. From this, we can draw the conclusion that a system makes design reusable. Because of that, we can scale projects, whereas without a system in place, we're basically creating bespoke design, which is inconsistent and hard to maintain. Now, is a design system equal to a pattern library, or a sketch file, or a style guide? The answer is no. A design system is all of that stuff and more. Here's a quote that I think explains this very well. It's by Emmett Connolly, Director of Product Design at Intercom. So most design systems are really just pattern libraries, a big box of UI Lego pieces that can be assembled in near infinite ways. All the pieces may be consistent, but that doesn't mean the assembled results will be. Your product is more than just a pile of reusable UI elements. It has structure and meaning. It's not a generic web page, it's the embodiment of a system of concepts. So a design system is a collection of assets and a set of standards and documentation that accompanies that collection. As the quote said, a pattern library is just a box of Lego pieces. In order to make it into a system, you need to add instructions, standards, and best practices. The style guide or pattern library, those are just deliverables, okay? And since we're on the topic of these two concepts, let's go ahead and define them to avoid any future confusion. A pattern library is a collection of components and guidelines for using them. A style guide is a set of guidelines for the graphic styles, typefaces, colors, images, and so on. Now, to give you an example of what I'm on about, I'm going to show you the Polaris design system, which is for Shopify. They're displaying their pattern library under components, right? So if we go here, we're going to find a list of components ranging from, cards, frames, layout pages, top bars, forms, right? So you can see all of these components here, and these are part of the pattern library, images and icons, and the list goes on and on. A style guide can be found here under design, where we find information about colors, typography, illustrations, icons, and so on. So they're split into categories, but as you can see, the Shopify design system is not just pattern libraries and style guides, right? They also have some patterns here, information about content like the voice and tone, the naming, the vocabulary that's being used. And on each component, you'll find examples of how to use these, accessibility information, best practices, and guidelines, right? That's the difference between just a pattern library and a design system, okay? The design system comes with all these extra bits of information. Now, let's see some example design systems. These are created by large companies and are used even today. The first one, and I already mentioned this, is material design, right? This is made by Google, and it's a way to unify their product line across platforms. So we're talking web, and we're talking Android. They designed basically a visual language that ties all of these together. And just like any other design system, we have the style guide, right? This is under design. You'll find information right here about typography, colors. Then we have the components or the pattern library, and they go into extensive detail on every component, how to use it, what are the best practices, and so on. Of course, they list some third-party resources as well. So this is yet another thing that you could include in a design system. Polaris, I showed you this previously. This is for Shopify. IBM has a design language. Here, you can see they split it up in three parts: philosophy, gallery, and elements. And you can find various bits of information about the colors and typography right here. Zendesk also has a design system called Garden. This is a bit simpler than the other ones, but it is a design system. Here, Garden divides their system into assets, CSS components, React components, and React containers. We also have a design system from Salesforce. This is called Lightning. And it's probably one of the most complete design systems that I've seen. As I mentioned, Adobe also has a design system. It's called Spectrum. And here you can find all the information you would expect, like components, patterns, guidelines for the content, and so on and so forth. And Atlassian also has a design system. You can find information about it right here under atlassian.design. All right, so I hope you got a better understanding of what is a design system after this lesson and after seeing these examples. We'll go more into this in the next couple of lessons, but for now, let's focus on the structure of a design system. That's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome to lesson number 2, where you'll learn about the structure of a design system. You've probably figured it out by now based on the examples that I showed you previously, but let's get into details a bit more. Before we do that, I would just like to mention that design systems are still relatively new. So people are still trying to figure out the best way to create them. That's why when it comes to structure, your mileage may vary. You'll find that some systems do things in a specific way while others do it differently. So take what I'm about to show you with a grain of salt, right? In the end, it's important that you create a system that helps you scale your product and maintain them properly. How you do that is up to you. But here are a couple of guidelines. We can divide the components of a design system in 2 parts, tangible and non-tangible, actual and abstract. You can name these in different ways. The tangible parts are patterns, components, style guides, and so on. These are the actual elements you can use and reference, and they represent the largest percentage of a design system. The non-tangible or abstract parts are represented by shared beliefs, company values, working mentality, brand purpose, design principles, and so on. Here's another way we can look at a design system. We have the pattern library, the style guide, and the rules and guidelines. This works in the majority of cases, or when you're a one-man team and you don't necessarily have shared beliefs or company values. Although, even as a freelancer, you should think of yourself as a brand and have a mission and values. But that's another discussion. Some brands add their company philosophy in the mix, like IBM does here. It's also common to list third-party resources like icons, fonts, and other tools team members can use. A good example is Google Material Design, which lists all the helpful resources in a separate page. You can also include an FAQ page with the most common questions, just like Salesforce is doing here. Now, regardless of the structure, you must treat a design system as its own product, right? Which means it's going to have different versions. You're going to iterate it. You're going to have a backlog for it. You're going to have a list of all the things that you want to add to it. It's very important that you start using a design system right away and not wait until it's perfect or complete, because a design system is never going to be complete. You're always going to update it. But if you're going to bring people on board early, you'll have a lot of benefits because they'll get used to it. It's going to be harder. It's going to be easier to update and maintain that design system, and you're going to start seeing good results in a short amount of time. Not to mention, you're going to see consistency in all of your projects. A great example of how you can do this is provided by the Polaris system. This offers a free sketch plugin called Telescope that shows you all the components and rules directly in the sketch document. So when you're designing the next product, you can just reference that. Very, very helpful. So we've talked about design systems and their structure. Now, there are a couple of different types of systems that you need to be aware of, and we'll discuss about those in the next lesson. Welcome to lesson number 3, where you'll learn about the different types of design systems, and different types work best for different people and different companies and different products. There is no one-stop solution for this. A design system should be tailored to a specific team, company, product, whatever it is. You can't simply borrow a design system from somewhere else and use it in your own product. It doesn't work like that. It needs to be custom made specifically for your project. I want to mention that most of these types are based on Alla Kolmatova's book called Design Systems. So have a look there. It's a great book on the subject. The first type is strict. As the name suggests, flexibility is not key here. Instead, there is extensive documentation, and the standards must be followed to the letter for a precise synchronization between designers and developers. This type of system must also cover a lot of ground because it must support a variety of scenarios. The second type is loose. This is more flexible than the strict one, and your team members can use it as a guideline mostly, or simply not use it at all. This allows for more experimentation, but you have to be careful because a design system that is not rigid enough is kind of pointless. If people don't use it and don't stick to standards, there's no point to having a system. You need to find the right balance. The third type is modular. This is made from interchangeable and reusable parts. Of course, any design system should have reusable parts, but for this one in particular, making components work well together while being independent is much harder. That's why this is the most difficult system to implement, and it's mostly suited for large products, for example, e-commerce websites. Now, apart from how a system is built, we also need to look at how a team builds that system, and there are a couple of different ways to do that as well. What I'm about to tell you now is based on this article by Nathan Curtis, and I recommend you read everything he wrote about design systems. In a nutshell, there are 3 models teams can follow to create and sustain a design system: solitary, centralized, and federated. Solitary is when one team shares their system with another team. Not a great option because, as I was saying earlier, a system must be tailored to the specific needs of the team or the company. So using another team's system might be okay to begin with, but it won't work in the long run. Centralized means a team is in charge of the system and continues to grow it. Their purpose is to facilitate the work of other teams. In this type of model, the team in charge doesn't actually do any design work, but they do work closely with the designers. Finally, teams based on the federated model have a very talented group of people in charge of the system. These people make all the decisions, and they convey those decisions to the other teams. These people are also fulfilling their original roles in the company. So there you have it. We looked at a few different types of design systems and a few ways or models that teams can use to build design systems. Now, how do you actually build a design system? Where do you start? Well, we'll discover that in the next chapter. And the first lesson on the topic is going to be about design tokens and principles. That's coming up next. Welcome to lesson number 4. In this chapter, you'll learn about the first steps you need to take to create a design system. But before that, there are 2 concepts you need to be aware of: design tokens and design principles. Design tokens are elements we use to store design-related variables. For example, a color value, a font family, or the value for an animation or a shadow, right? Actually, the Lightning Design System by Salesforce gives us a great definition for these design tokens. It says design tokens are the visual design atoms of the design system. Specifically, they are named entities that store visual design attributes. We use them in place of hard-coded values in order to maintain a scalable and consistent visual system for UI development. Now, if we open that system, we can take a look at the design tokens they're using. They're categorized right here on the right under colors, background color, text color, fonts, opacity, and so on and so forth. And if we go to font size, we can see that a token is, for example, font size 1. It has a short description, gives you an example, and you can see its properties here. Font size 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. If we go to spacing, we can find spacing large, spacing medium, spacing none. So instead of using these hard-coded values, they're using tokens, because in the future, instead of changing one value in 20 different places, all they have to do is change this value in one place. So change the value of the token. Now, there are two things I want you to notice about these tokens. Number one, they have meaningful names. They're very descriptive. So this color is called brand accessible. And it tells you what it's for, dark variant of brand that is accessible with white. What else? Brand contrast, brand dark, brand header contrast. So they're very descriptive with their token names so that people know exactly what to use them for. That's really, really good. And also, I want you to notice that these options are varied across scales. We saw that here under spacing. We have spacing large, medium, none, small, X large, X small, XX large, and so on. So they kind of built this system with responsive web design in mind. And when it comes to using different spacing values for different breakpoints, well, it's really easy to reach out for one of these tokens. Now, should you make every single value into a token? No, absolutely not. That's a mistake. You should only consider using tokens on values that are repeating themselves in multiple places. So if you have, for example, a border color that you apply to a lot of different elements, then sure, use a token. But if you're just using a color in one place, don't bother. Just use the hard-coded value, and that's it. Now, how you store these values is really up to you. It depends on how you code. The easiest method would be variables for SAS, less, or whatever preprocessor you're using. Or if you want a more universally approachable solution, you could use JSON. That's a format that was built specifically for this type of data. And if you're going to use JSON, you make sure that your data is cross-platform, which is fantastic. So if you want to read more about design tokens, I've actually included some links in the lesson notes. So go ahead and check those out. Now, let's talk about design principles. These are concepts, they're guidelines that you need to follow. To explain it better, I'm going to show you a quote from Luke Wroblewski. It says, "Design principles are the guiding light for any software application. They define and communicate the key characteristics of a product to a wide variety of stakeholders, including clients, colleagues, and team members. Design principles articulate the fundamental goals that all decisions can be measured against, and thereby keep the pieces of a project moving towards an integrated whole." Now, to better explain what a principle is, I'm going to show you some examples. There are a couple of websites. This is one of them, principles.design. And here, if you go to examples, you can filter by the category. Let's go to software. And let's go to HTML design principles. Here, you can see that, hey, compatibility is one principle, and you get a description here. Utility, universal access. Let's go to front-end principles. Avoid too much variation. Keep performance in mind. This is a great principle. I think everyone should follow this. Understand source order. Let content determine breakpoints, right? So when you're doing responsive web design, this is a great concept to keep in mind at all times. Maintain consistency. So go ahead and check out these principles. There's also another website called designprinciplesftw.com that also shows you a bunch of design principles, and you can grab any of these and use it in your own system. That's totally fine. So in this lesson, you've learned about design tokens and design principles. These are two concepts you should always keep in mind before building a design system. Now, what is the next step? How do you actually build a design system? Well, let's think about it this way. What are the building blocks of any design language? Well, it's color, spacing, and typography, right? That's where you should start, and we'll explore this aspect in more detail in the next lesson. Welcome to lesson number 5, where you'll learn how to start your design system by tackling color, spacing, and typography. I think the very first element you need to tackle is color, because color is everywhere and it's a fundamental building block for any project. If you're asking why it's so important, well, it's because every component in your project is made visible through color. Now, when adding color to your design system, you can categorize it however you want, but a good idea would be to split it up in 3 categories: layout, UI, and semantic. Layout colors are used for the page layout, borders, headers, footers, containers, and so on. UI colors are used for text, buttons, and forms. And finally, semantic colors are used for elements or states with a certain meaning: success, error, warning, information, and so on. Now, when you're creating these color palettes, there are 2 aspects you need to keep in mind. Number 1, name your colors in a clear and possibly descriptive way. So instead of referring to a color by its hex code, like DCDOFF, refer to it by a more descriptive name, like lavender. How you name these colors is up to you, but it's much easier to discuss these with other people if they have names. Number 2, make sure your colors are accessible. That means that people with visual impairments will be able to use your product just like everyone else. And you might think this is not a big deal, but it is. Here's a fact for you. Globally, at least 2.2 billion people are visually impaired or suffer from blindness. The current world population is around 7.7 billion people. Do a quick math and you'll find that the percentage of people with visual impairments is around 29%. And I think that's a pretty big deal. Now, the simplest way to make colors accessible is to add enough contrast. There are tools you can use to check this. For example, ColorSafe. You'll find the link in the lesson notes. Now, to get started with the color palettes, you can follow this simple process. Number 1, define the primary colors. These are the colors displayed most frequently and are usually tied to your brand. Number 2, define these secondary colors. These are accent colors, really, not that frequent. Number 3, define your tints and shades. So, for every color, it's good to have a few variations. It doesn't mean you'll use all of them, but they're nice to have. Number 4, define the neutrals or grays. These are usually made for text and backgrounds. Number 5, define your semantic colors. These are usually red, green, yellow, and blue, but you can use various shades and tints to make them match your project. The second element you should tackle is spacing, and along with it, sizing. Sizing and spacing are core components of any design language. So you really need to pay close attention to this. There's a whole discussion on the subject on how big they are. We can probably make a full course on this, but for now, here are the essentials. When it comes to sizing, it's a good idea to use some sort of grid system or scale to define the measurement units. The 8-point system is very popular and very powerful. With this, you basically define your units in multiples of 8, and because 8 is divisible by 2 and 4, you make sure you don't get half pixels in your measurements, therefore avoiding anti-aliasing blur. You can also use a scale for your measurement units. This is also very popular because you can create a very nice rhythm. Each point in the scale is based on the previous one multiplied with a ratio. This is very similar to a typographic scale, if you're familiar with that. So those are a few tips on sizing, but what about spacing? Well, when you say spacing, you basically mean margins and paddings. You can use the same 8-point system or a scale to define certain tokens for the various levels of margin or padding, like you can see in this example here. Now, what about em versus rem versus pixels? Which one should you use in your design system? Well, I personally recommend rems. I've been using them in most of my projects, and I like how flexible they are. So that's what I think you should do. But ems certainly have their place, so do pixels. If you want to learn more about when and how to use these, check out the lesson notes for an article by Kes Bracey, where all of this is explained in more detail. The third component you should tackle is typography, and just like the other two, this is super important to any design language. The first thing is to include typefaces, and for this, it's best you have a chat with the branding team to see which ones you should use. But if you're working solo, then try and figure out which ones align best with the brand that you're building for. The second step is to define the scale or the different font sizes you'll use. Here, I recommend you use a modular typographic scale, and there are several tools you can use to generate one, like Archetype. Now, I recommend you create tokens for the various font sizes you'll be using. It's not a great idea to use hard-coded values for font sizes on different elements. For example, the Lightning system defines its font sizes as font size 1, 2, 3, and so on. Polaris names its font sizes display X large, display medium, and so on, all the way down to body and caption. It's also a good idea to create tokens for the font weights. In CSS, you can specify font weights by their numeric value. For example, regular is 400, bold is 700, black is 900. Also, don't forget about the accessibility part for typography. And here are a few key points here. Always use font sizes bigger than 16 pixels. Don't use uppercase letters like for the entire body text. That's super hard to read. Use the appropriate line height for your text because visually impaired people have a really hard time reading text with like 100% line height or with very big line heights like 200 or 250%. And finally, make sure the colors you're using are accessible. So use the correct contrast there. Now, those are the first three elements you should include in your design system: color, spacing, and typography. But obviously, you don't have to stop there. So what else can you include in your system? Well, let's have a look at that in the next lesson. Welcome to the sixth and final lesson of this course. Now, in the previous lesson, you learned the first three elements you should always include in your design system: color, spacing, and typography. Now, obviously, you don't have to stop here. You can add as many elements to the system as you deem necessary. Here are a few ideas to get you going. Icons represent an important aspect of design, and depending on the type of project you're building, you're going to have a different number of icons, a different style of icons. For example, if you're building an admin interface, you're probably going to have a lot of icons. If you're building a simple presentation website, you're going to have very few. Regardless of their number, what's important is that you document their style, their size, and in which context they're being used. You can also consider possible animations you'll be adding to your icons. For example, material design has a dedicated section for the various transitions that can be applied to icons. If you plan on using these in your project, you need to document them. It's also important to list any resources here. For example, if you're using an icon set, then you need to document that, because in the future, if you want to add more icons, you should be using elements from the same set, not a different one. That's to maintain consistency. If you're planning on using animations or transitions in your projects, for example, a transition on button hover, then you need to document this so developers will know what animations or transitions to use in order to keep everything consistent. If you're going to use shadows, it's also important to document them. Again, just to keep things consistent in the long run. It's also a good idea to tokenize them, to create design tokens for them, so that developers will have a much easier time working with these. Grid systems are a must-have nowadays, so it's imperative that you document the one or the ones that you're using. And by grid system, I don't necessarily mean the 8-point system I talked about previously, but although that's also good to document, but I'm talking about the vertical columns or horizontal rows that you're using to create layouts. If you've ever used Bootstrap or Foundation, then you know what I'm talking about. Responsive breakpoints are also very important. Today, you cannot build a web product that's not responsive, right? So get these set up right from the start, and you'll have a much easier time working from that point on. If you're looking for a great guide on setting responsive breakpoints, I recommend this article by David Gilbertson. And the list can go on and on. Have a look at the examples that I showed you and see how they're built, right? These are built by huge companies, so they have teams of people working on this stuff. We have a lot to learn from it. Now, here are a few key takeaways from this course. Number one, a design system is never complete, right? You'll always be adding to it, you'll always be perfecting it, and the truth is a design system will evolve together with the product. Number two, you can always build a design system. It doesn't matter if you're a huge company or if you're an individual, a freelancer just starting out. You can always do that, and it's going to help you tremendously. And finally, number three, a design system is not just a style guide or a pattern library or a sketch file. It's all of those things and more. It has all of those things and principles and guidelines and values and so on and so forth, right? So don't just think that if you created a sketch file or a Figma file and you design some components, then hey, you have a design system. No, you need to write the appropriate documentation for how to use those components, in what context, what are the best practices to do that. And with that said, I hope you found this course useful and that it gave you a little bit more insight into what design systems are all about and what are the steps you need to take to create one. I would like to thank you very much for watching this course. I'm Adi Pordillo, and until next time, take care.